There we go.
Boa tarde a todos e todas. Good afternoon. For me in Ireland, it's good evening. I would like to thank everybody that is joining us today. And first of all, to say that today we are going to be talking in English because that's the language that is more comfortable to most of us, as I wouldn't be comfortable in speaking Spanish, and I guess my colleague Exequiel wouldn't
No
be
Portuguese.
very comfortable with Portuguese either. So our choice today is English. I am Elaine Pereira Faro. I am coordinating Insulae with Dr. Isabella Albuquerque. And I am very happy to welcome today Exequiel Monge Allen, who is a colleague of mine that has been working in the National University of Ireland in Galway. He's doing his doctoral research there, and he works with monasticism and the Cayley Day, and we will be explaining what the Cayley Day are or what they are not. And he's also an expert in Old Irish, so he works from a Celtic languages department. Don't get nervous, it's true.
That's a
And
big thing
in
to
our
say, Elaine.
realm of Latin America, you are definitely an expert. Um, so I would like to introduce the other colleagues that will be chatting to us as well. So Tati Pulhosa, she has a PhD in religious science, and she is also an expert in early Irish history. And she got her PhD at PUC São Paulo. She's currently coordinating the history course at Belas Artes in São Paulo. And Clarissa Matana has recently started her doctoral research as well at the comparative program at the Federal University of Rio de Janeiro. And she also works with monasticism and saints' lives, hagiography, gender studies. So the four of us have a lot of interests in common, and our research kind of touches each other. So I will kick off with a icebreak question. We usually like to ask our guests how they got into the field of research, why they're working with the so-called insular world and insular history. So my first question is how and why did you get into Irish medieval studies? Why religious studies specifically? And which research topics do you find yourself currently more interested?
Mhm. Okay, so first of all, thank you very much for the invitation. I'm thrilled to be talking to you all. Uh, and I'm sure this is going to be a very stimulating conversation all around. Um, Thank you. I'm truly touched. So to dive in, I guess that as many people do, I became fascinated by the Middle Ages in general through the more fantastic side of it, from the more mythological, legendary side of it, and I was very much convinced that what I wanted to do in my life was to dive in into this fabulous and mysterious world of history and literature that has to do with the Middle Ages from a very early stage, and my contact with the Middle Ages in these fantastic fashion, if you want, was the classic one. So very much, say, mm, say informed, if you want, by the mythology of the Arthurian cycle, Merlin, Druidism, and things of the sort. So I was, say, predisposed towards the islands, the Atlantic islands, from a very early stage. When I decided to study history, I was trying to decide whether I wanted to study theology or history, and I was co-opted into history by a priest at the time, so I ended up studying history and not theology. Um, In my first year, I did the regular course in medieval history. I was fascinated. I had a fantastic teacher, fantastic lecturer there, and I was hired as his assistant while I was still studying. It's the normal thing in Chile. It's not a big deal. It's the usual thing for lecturers to hire students that have already done well in their courses to become their assistants, and this was the case. But an expert in Byzantine history, so it was so he actually didn't have a lot to do with Britain or Ireland or anything of the sorts. But in my second year, I took a small research course, monografía, it's called in Chile, with a different lecturer, and it was very broadly about death and travel in the Middle Ages. And we had to choose a source, a written source for us to work with. And I thought about working with the Navigatio Sancti Brendani, and I found it so fascinating. I hadn't read it. I hadn't read it properly in full before I did that course under that teacher and under that lecturer, and it really fascinated me the way in which religion and fairy tale stuff um, combined in this particular story. And from that point on, I had this idea that going into what at the time I was calling Celtic Christianity would allow me to explore the boundaries between um, Christianity and other stuff, and weird stuff, say. Weird, interesting, fascinating, tantalizing, mesmerizing, mysterious stuff of legend and magic, say. And I have to say, in the long run, I was not wrong, but I was right in a very different way than what I was expecting. I was, I was drawn into the field by this promise um, of magic. Um, and then the year after that, I don't know, it was actually the same year. The same year, the same lecturer, she had a small research course on the history of childhood, and I decided to research what different Irish saint lives had to say about saintly children. So I did that. And then she had one on clothes and colors. And I did a survey of the representation of clothing in the Book of Kells. And then I did another one with a different lecturer, the one I was working for at the time. It was a research model, year-long research model, more in depth, and it was about Franks and Visigoths. But I managed to smuggle Ireland into that topic because I went with Columbanus, with Columbanus' monastic rules and the Vita Columbani et Discipulorum Eius of Jonas of Bobbio. So by the end of it, I was already doing more with Irish stuff than anyone else was in Chile. So after I spent 2 years as a teacher, studying education and becoming a teacher proper, with the Chilean system, I decided to take this thing seriously, and I migrated to Ireland to study, um, to get my PhD in Celtic studies, basically. But the wonderful person who is now my PhD supervisor and has been for too long, I have to say, Moitin Neronach of Galway, we were corresponding through email, and she said to me, "You will need Old Irish, and it's a tough one. It's a tough bone to chew, right? So it would be better if you do the MA first, and then move on to the PhD, even if at the time it was still feasible, possible, say." To go directly into a PhD, but she advised otherwise, and I was smart enough to follow her advice. So I did the MA in Old and Middle Irish and devoted 2 years of 1 year of my life exclusively to study it. And then I got the IRC scholarship and I started the PhD under her. So that is the story of how I got into the insular world. And I have to say, I do believe at this point in my life that the same thing that had me fascinated with fantasy and Tolkien and mythology and legends is very much the same thing that has me absolutely fascinated with religion, because it really covers the same part of the human spirit. The one that has to do with imagination, the one that has to do with fear, the one that has to do with hope, the one that has to do with longing and desire, etc. So it's very familiar to me. And I am sympathetic enough to Christianity, being myself a religious person, and a Christian and a weird Catholic myself, to feel comfortable with that kind of material, with that kind of sources. Say, I know that it happens a lot in Chile when I offer workshops or courses or small courses on Irish stuff. People want to know about druids and they want to know about gods and the Irish pantheon, etc. And it's always like I'm cheating, like I am deceiving them, because around the third class I go and say, I'm sorry, we have nothing. Like, we know nothing about druids, and we know nothing about gods, and we know nothing about pre-Christian Irish religion. And what we have is this beautiful mythographic mythology, this beautiful mythopoietic thing in which Christian writers during the Middle Ages were inventing a mythology of their own to suit their ends, and it's fantastic and fascinating to dive into that. But I love Christian mythology. I feel comfortable with it, and Ireland is such a fantastic gold mine to explore that, to explore Christian mythology in as hagiography, as sermons, as apocryphal material, as even, there is so much mystery and mythology and Christian magic involved, even in the driest of texts. You, Elaine, know this better than I. You have been working with the penitentials for such a long time, and they might look dry, but when you scratch just a little bit on the surface, you find their myths, their supernatural scares, their cosmology, everything. It's all right there. So I would say that the reason that keeps me in the field is very much the same one that drew me into it in the beginning, a fascination for the supernatural.
That's
So that.
actually No, that's actually awesome. It's I was listening to you and I was thinking about my own path into it, and a lot of it has to do with this fascination with religion and supernatural and everything.
Mm,
But let me ask you something. If someone comes to you right now and says, "Listen, I would love to go into the field of Irish medieval studies," where would you tell him or her to start? Which works would you
mm,
recommend? Which ones would you
mm,
not recommend? What
mm.
would you say, like, try this one, but definitely don't do this? Because it was something
That
that,
would.
back then when
Mm,
I started, I really wish I had someone to help me out with that.
mm. Well, this is gonna come as a weird answer, but first of all, so as you know, and I would think that most of the beautiful Brazilian people joining us know, there is a language gap, right? Like, if you want to go into Celtic studies, you better know either English or German, and that's about it, or a Celtic language. But that's extremely unlikely in Latin America from the start, and unless you are from Chubut in Argentina, and you may know Welsh. But aside from that very, very thin possibility, the language gap is there. So first of all, I would ask, do you know English? Do you have English? And if you do have English, that's all good and nice. If you don't, and you're truly fascinated with the Celtic, with the Irish medieval world, um, what I have done in the past is say more or less, let's be friends, and I will help you. I will translate things for you. I will read aloud things for you. I will explain things to you. Meanwhile, you go study English, because the language gap is there, and it's absolutely impossible to go into this field without mastering one language or the other. But in the meanwhile, and I actually have done that with some people, meeting with them and reading aloud for them and stuff. Now, let us put ourselves in the situation that the hypothetical novice has English. In that case, I would say that I would recommend W. Cronin's Early Medieval Ireland, which is easy and fast to read, and will leave you well situated. I think it's a good exercise in that regard. And also, possibly, if the initial infatuation is confirmed, I would point towards Thomas Charles Edwards' Early Christian Ireland. I think those are two very, very reliable handbooks to start with. And I think that handbooks are useful. I like them personally, especially when you're starting, and things that are well written, and easy to read. I will not mention the author by name, but we were talking about another very long, very well researched book yesterday, right? Which is actually very difficult to come by because it was published with a very, very small publisher somewhere in Leinster, um, which is extremely difficult to access. Not only it's difficult to get the book, but it's very difficult to read altogether. And I think that a very important thing is to preserve the fascination of the beginning, to feed the infatuation, right? But I would say those two handbooks are a fantastic gateway to the world of early medieval Ireland. At the same time, I would strongly recommend to read sources, to read primary material, to see how fascinating this thing can be. And in that regard, I would say, depending on the particular leanings of the specific people, say if it were something like ourselves with an interest in religious studies, reading, for example, Murchu's Vita Patrici, Tirehan's Collectanea, Cogitosus Life of Bridget, which are easy to read, and there's a copious amount of scholarship done around them, right? Things that are easy enough to come by. So I would say I would recommend walking those parallel paths. Say one or two very trustworthy handbooks, and then simultaneously say diving in on the deep part of the pool with some primary sources like those.
Those are amazing do's. Any don'ts we should tell our hypothetical student?
The don'ts. The don'ts. Okay. I would stop them probably from from trying to acquire things that have been roving around Latin America over the last few days, over the last century, probably, things that are available and that usually generalist medievalists have on the radar. Say, for example, at least in Chile, this is a weird little book, and I have realized that people in Ireland do not know it. It's called Le Miracle Irlandais, translated into English as The Miracle of Ireland. I think I have it here. Mm. This little book. This is edited by Henri Daniel Ropes. Henri Daniel Ropes was this fantastic writer, fantastic author, a master of prose. He was French, member of the Académie Royale, diehard Roman Catholic, and a true poet. He's the author of one of the most authorized global histories of the church that was read in Catholic seminaries before the Second Vatican Council and after, I would say. But it's extremely pious. It's extremely in Spanish we would say something like lectura edificante, like an edifying read, like something to uplift your spirit and tell you the epic of Christianity. So Henri Daniel Ropes put together the scholars of the time. This is let me see. So it's 1959. So this one has, say, for example, people we know of, John Ryan, the Jesuit writer of, I think it's early Irish monasticism. It has François Henry and other heroes of the time, other stars of the time. But it's all very updated, and I have to say that to a degree, I read some of these before I went to Ireland, and I had to like unlearn things that I had read before, and especially because now we have what's the name of this thing, archive.org, that will allow you, for example, to have a copy of Friedrich's Warren Rite and Liturgy of the Celtic Church. But if you read it and you are not aware that those paradigms have been outdated for a while, for a long while now, you might find yourself in the situation that you have to unlearn everything you have learned before. And then there is another rabbit hole I would very much advise people against falling in, which is these. I'm lucky enough to be sitting in my library now, so which is these. This is in Spanish. It's called El Cristianismo. Sorry, this is there. El Cristianismo Celta, by this French cook. This is cook and French madman. Half occultist, half scholar, say. It's le christianisme celtique, c'est survivant populaire, I think. My French is awful, but I'm trying to pronounce it properly. And it's 1983. This is full of lies, and if you go if you're interested in the true fascination that comes from religion and mythology, this will lead you into into the wrong alley, say. And also another example of the same thing is these. That would be the Celtic Church, Coldee Monks and Freemasons by Jose Francisco Ferro. This is an Argentinian Freemason, and it's also full of crazy stuff. So, you know, there Mateus Campos says, stop the Mists of Avalon as well. But yeah, but that's fiction, and these pretend to be scholarship. Yeah, so those would be the rabbit holes that I would try to avoid. The thing is this, right? The Celtic realms are surrounded by mist in a way. They are surrounded by mist in a way, and it's true. It is there. It's a fantastic thing, but while I would absolutely encourage people who have these our shared fascination for mystery and magic and the supernatural to go seriously into it with their eyes wide open and properly into academia to find what it's actually there, because it's absolutely fantastic and fascinating and enough to feed your hunger for mystery and magic and fairies as much as you want. I would recommend to avoid the rabbit hole, the pitfall actually of esotericism and occultism, which is an infection in our field. Yeah, and it's a completely different thing. It's a different thing altogether. I don't know if the distinction is clear, but those would be my little uh, my advice in that regard. I tend to answer in a very lengthy fashion, so please sign to me or.
No, not at all. It's fascinating. So please go on. Please, please, please.
No, that's it. That's it. That's my very long answer to a very simple question.
Brilliant. Thank you.
Okay, this subject of Celtic monasticism is very interesting, but we are going to come back to this later. Now I want to ask you, when it comes to Irish medieval studies, how can we innovate, moving away from these traditional projects that we have?
I think that the most fascinating thing that happens in medieval studies is when unusual people come into the field, because the interesting point of views come with us, right? Say the brilliant things that have happened in the last years when people coming from different ethnicities, from different parts of the world, come and explore fields that do not belong to them, like they belong to the old white European or Northern American men that have been doing this job for the longest time. The problem is that the beautiful thing is these new people will carry their questions with them, and they will find new things because they have different questions, because they have different lives. Say, what has happened to our field as soon as women came into it? What has happened to our field when we have a brilliant Chinese scholar, for example, working in Maynooth? What happens in our field when gender and sexual minorities, like myself, come into the field? And, for example, it struck me immediately how gay monks are, how beautifully gay monks are. Like those stories are full of gayness and queerness all over the place. And you just see things because you are different, because you are carrying with you different questions. So I think that the best idea is to come into the field with your problems, coming from your social class, your age, your love life, the oppressions you might have suffered, the discriminations you might have suffered, with your problems, because that's the thing. So Celtic studies is fascinating in a way because we have so much material. There's so many bits and pieces of texts to study that we could be translating texts forever. Like Celtic studies is a field in which you still can be a positivist and run with it, because you can spend your lifetime editing stuff, and that's your career, and it's fantastic and it's very useful. But the true novelty comes from new people coming into the field. It's like what happens. It is like what happens with theology, and Tati will back me up here, right? In theology, we speak of contextual theology, and like the new things happen when Black people do theology, or Native American people do theology, or Native Brazilian people do theology, or queer people do theology, or women who are altogether new to theology do theology. So what I would do if I were in an institutional place, I would open the door, the gates wide open for new and strange people to come in, And now, if you are a strange person, a weird person, listening to me as a kind of odd person in European studies of whatever kind, I would say go into the field with your uniqueness first, with the things that make you special first, and new things will appear. They will necessarily appear because you will see them while reading the texts. You will see the oppression of women. You will see the use of color. For example, for example, when you go into monastic studies, right? I don't know if any of you have read the fantastic scholarship done by this man. He's David Brake, or Brake, Brakkke, and he has done these fantastic monographs on monastic demonology. And the whole thing of the trope of the devil being black, and not only being black, but being an Ethiopic man, being someone from Ethiopia. That's fascinating. And it has been glossed over for centuries of people reading the stories, who thought it was the most normal thing for the devil to be black. I don't know if I have never seen David Brake. I don't know if he's Afro himself, but it just strikes me as the most interesting thing. And it will be easier for people who have these concerns, who have these motivations and preoccupations in their backpack from the onset. That's it. That's my idea.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Exequiel. The next question we prepared for you, I think you partially answered. So I think I'll give you, in a way, a kind of a second half of the question, but I will also take the chance and link with what our colleague Eric Carvalho is asking in the chat, because I think it's also highly related to what you have been saying now. Because so basically the question we were planning to ask is about accessibility of material for people based in Latin America. So you already presented gaps. So you already spoke about the need of learning at least English or perhaps German, of depending on which sources you will work with, you have to learn Latin and Old Irish. But also you mentioned that you came to Ireland, and I also had to do, or I felt the need of doing that journey as well and coming to work here. But obviously there's the challenge of funding. And if I understood you correctly, the first part of your experience was self-funded, and then you had funding from an Irish agency. So, so basically, if you could focus on what you think is accessible and can be done from Latin America, but then I will throw in together the question from Eric. Basically, Eric's asking, so let me try to find exactly the question here again. So basically he's asking, like, from our Latin America reality, what are the contributions we can make? What are, like, so, I mean, I don't know how familiar my Brazilian colleagues are to the educational system in Chile. I am not. So obviously I could think of what Brazilians have to offer and what kind of background we have. But then it would be nice to hear of what you think of your background. You were talking about your BA and the courses you did. So quite often people here in Europe, they're surprised. They don't know we have medievalists in Brazil and that we have, like, full departments with people teaching medieval history. So what do you think is the academic contributions that we get from our Latin American system that we can bring to Europe with us? You already spoke about the whole social, cultural aspects, the things that inform the way we are and the way we think. But I'm wondering if there are more kind of institutional ways of doing history in Chile, for example, that you think is useful to bring back to an European system. So basically, I have two questions that you can focus on which one you'll find easier, I suppose.
So I think that will depend a lot on what country of Latin America are we coming from. For instance, I know that my dear friend Santiago Barreiro in Argentina. Do you know him? He's a fantastic scholar of Norse. He's good friends with Luciana, whom you had the last time here. So I know that in Argentina and in Brazil, you have it easier than us in Chile to a degree. I mean, you said it yourself. You have departments of uh, people studying medieval studies. Here in Chile, you have to smuggle it into something else. So there are just a few positions of teaching medieval history in universities, medieval literature as well in faculties that would have faculties of literature, and aside and there is really next to no support from either the state or private institutions who could be interested in these. So my story is a story that would have been impossible, say, had it not been for privilege and good luck. I mean, the fact that I was able to go to Ireland in the beginning, self-funded, was only possible for me because I had the support of my family at the time, and I could only stay for the PhD because I got the Irish scholarship. It's almost impossible to get a Chilean scholarship to do anything in medieval history or medieval literature, or most things in the humanities, I reckon, to be very honest. What can we do from Latin America? I think that a very interesting thing to do is what my mentor in medieval studies, Professor Jose Marin, has done with Byzantine things. Like, since he's in Chile, he's very aware that he doesn't have access to all the material he could dream of. But he has a very good nose to pick the right editions of materials. Say, and since he has English and French and other modern languages that would allow him to work with them, what we can do from Latin America, if we have English, or German and possibly French, but I don't reckon that French is that useful for Irish studies altogether. Not really. What you can do is work really hard using materials that have been made available by scholars working closer to the center of the field, I reckon, and apply good hermeneutical techniques and strategies on them, and you will come up with interesting stuff nonetheless. That said, I don't know if I am answering the question in the sense that you were putting it, Elaine. If you want to steer me in a different direction, please feel free to.
No, I think it is great because obviously, like there are many ways you could answer this question, and I mean,
well,
obviously, in terms of accessibility, primarily, I suppose, is what people can get online, and as you're saying, accessing private libraries. But I think you gave an answer of how to approach what is available and what is feasible.
I think that there's a lot that we can do for each other. I think that there's a lot that we can do for each other in medieval studies and insular studies in Latin America. I think that a very generous thing to do is to create bibliography. So so our colleagues and novices in the field can know what to look for, what to ask for, because occasionally they will be able to have a lecturer or a teacher that can order something in for their university libraries, but instead of ordering just whatever, if there are bibliographies out there that say these are the books you should get, these are the things you would need, that would be useful, for instance. Then to make it possible in all the ways available for us to learn, teach, and perfect our language skills because you can only go seriously into a field by knowing the the language of the sources, right? And that is feasible in many different ways, I think. One is what you're doing in Insulae, that you are putting together a course in Old Irish that is for free. Another thing is what I'm doing in Chile, that I teach Old Irish. I charge people, but I charge very little, as little as I can possibly charge to make it worth my while economically. I'm unemployed, by the way, so that too. But also from within the universities and the places of work that we are currently engaged at, to push to make it possible that old languages and dead languages are taught, and not only the weird ones, not only Old Irish and Old Norse and Old English, but Latin and Greek, to do our very best to keep those programs afloat, to have them taught and taught well in the places that we can access. I think that's another very, very important thing to do. And then there is what we can also do is to translate. But I think that the way to go, and this is something that I really want to do in Chile, it's very much on the top of my to-do list, is to translate good scholarship, is to be humble enough that instead of producing new stuff and throwing our very young names, because all of us, we're all young people. I'm 33, and I'm not going to ask anyone's age. I'm 33. I'm not ready. I do not consider myself ready to put together, to author, say, a handbook of early Christian Ireland or early Irish Christianity or anything of the sorts. But just to be humble enough to translate, say, don't take this one away from me, because I already started. I am currently, even if not very systematically, because I'm very busy with PhD, but I have started translating Davio Cronin's Early Medieval Ireland to Spanish, and you can talk with the scholars, and they will likely authorize you for free to produce proper translations in Portuguese or in Spanish, depending, right, of their work. And I think that we can contribute by doing that as well. Now, the question of translating sources, of producing original editions of sources, say from Old Irish to Spanish, that's a tricky one. I know that Luciana was brave enough to do this, and I know that Santiago has been brave enough to translate. But Luciana translated the Mabinogi, right? And Santiago has been translating sagas. The thing there is that, at least in Old Irish, I wouldn't know about Welsh or Old Norse. I would be terrified. Say I'm going to produce an edition and translation of the Tombo Kulanga into Spanish. I'd rather shoot myself, honestly. Like, there is only one text in the world that I feel confident enough to produce an edition of, and barely, and that is, no, it's actually 3 texts. The Old Irish Penitential, the Monastery of Tala, and the Rule of the Kile. And if I try to, it's very much in my to-do list. It's very much my plan to, after I'm done with the PhD, to translate my dissertation into Spanish as well and publish it in Spanish to make it available. But that is such an ant-like work, right? It's such a microscopic step, because students will need other things before. They will need the Tomokulen. They will need the Agalot Nashenorach. They will need the Navigator Hravoid. They will need the old Irish, the Irish penitentials, not just the old Irish penitential. They will need a proper edition in Spanish of the most beautiful saint life ever written. And I don't know if Clarissa will agree with me now, but that is out of none of Iona's Vita Columbae. Like, show me a more beautiful geography than that. What is it? I don't know. And they will need it, and they will need it long before they are patient enough to deal with the material I'm working with. We need the other Irish geographies, the Brigitan corpus, etc. I don't know. I think that it's a better strategy right now to keep languages alive, to help people become proficient in English or German, so they can go into these fields on their own, and be humble enough to translate the work of our mentors, of our forebearers, the fantastic forebearers we have. I mean, the work of Donogho Corroin needs to be translated into Spanish. The work of Davy O'Cronin needs to be translated into Spanish. Elva Johnston's groundbreaking monograph on literacy needs to be translated into Spanish and Portuguese. Everything I'm saying Spanish, please hear Portuguese. I mean for all of us, right? And maybe we can do that work, because paying professional, because I don't know about you, but I feel that I'm better suited than professional translators who know nothing about the field to translate these books. I don't know about you. It would require a really technical, a really technically qualified translator to do the work otherwise. And I'm sorry, I know I'm answering so long.
No, you're not. It's actually, we were just talking because it actually went into exactly what we were thinking about for the next question, because
Okay.
that's something we've been talking about amongst ourselves, about what can we do as scholars here to actually make it more accessible. So I think it was brilliant the way you answered that. But one thing we have been coming and going and sort of touched around it, but haven't
One
really.
One more thing. Try to create, to raise awareness of how important open access is.
Yes, definitely.
To try to create awareness of how important it is that we try to uplift the quality of those journals and publications that are open access and for free and are still good ones, and try and try and talk our scholarly friends into, please. I mean, one of the most important works in our field is the Clavis Literarum Hiberniae, right? The Donogho Corroin's monumental survey of all of Irish sources for all the Middle Ages. That thing, if I'm not wrong, when it came out, it was priced at 1,600 euros for the 4 volumes, edited in Brepols. That's a barrier, and that's an awfully unfair barrier, because you would have to
even
talk
for our libraries, not even for personal purchase, but imagine the Latin American libraries having to buy it.
Yes.
They simply won't. For heaven's sake, they simply won't. And I know there are journals there that are extremely prestigious, say CMCS. That is a Cambrian medieval CM studies. I don't know what the sigla, but CMCS. CMCS is a fantastic journal, absolutely germane to our field, and for some reason it's not online. Not even it's not digital. You have to go behind their back, which is not a nice thing to do. Anyway, right? But we have to share. We have to share, and we have to. I think that part of what we have to do is it's political, and I'm sorry here, it is political. It has nothing to do with anything that's not politics. It's to blow up off the cap of competitiveness and capitalism from academia in our area and start sharing and start making things available and start and stop gatekeeping this thing. That one. Thank
Definitely.
you. Cambridge
And
Medieval Celtic Studies. Yeah.
It's definitely very, very something we do need to talk about, and we do need to make people more aware of it. But one thing I want to ask you, because we're sort of nearing the 1 hour mark, and we've been sort of touching around it, and no, it's brilliant, but we've been sort of going around it, and we touched it, but then we didn't, is about the concept of Celtic Christianity, and most likely, and especially Celtic monasticism. Could you talk to us a little bit about, you know, the term and the problems around it, and you know, go into the Kelly Day a little bit, so we can sort of unravel what is mystical about it.
Okay, and I will try to keep this one as short as possible, right? So the concept of Celtic Christianity is a very political one, even if it doesn't feel like that anymore. I think my dear friend Kieran McDonough could correct me here, but I will say it in a broad way, so that I do not shoot my own feet. It has to do with the time in which the Church of Ireland, that is the Anglican Church in Ireland, wanted to assess their original independence from the Roman Church. So the idea that some sort of non-Roman Christianity existed in Ireland first, and Ireland and Wales first, and brought again into Britain, and say that it was antagonized by, and I'm quoting here Friedrich Warren, right, by the popist imperialism of Gregory I, and turned into a satellite of the Roman Church, but that it was originally something different altogether. And I think that very clearly the model is the autonomous and culturally autonomous churches of the East. They wanted to think about a Celtic Christianity as we have an Armenian Christianity, a Georgian Christianity, Ethiopian Coptic Christianity, Syrian, etc. They wanted to find something like that in the West, and that was germane to their attempts of creating this. I don't recall the name of it, but it's the branching theory in ecclesiology, that Christianity has always existed in these coordinated branches, and that the independence of these autocephalous branches was there from the beginning, right? It's not a development, but rather something original from Christianity. But then this that was so dear to people like Friedrich Warren and others, it became also interesting for all sorts of nationalist Irish people and Welsh people, right? To say there is something distinctly national, distinctly ours, distinctly identitarian of these figures, and therefore St. Patrick is as Irish as potatoes are not, but as a sheep, say. It's this very Irish thing, and all of these enhances our sense of national identity. There is also another strand of this myth, right, which is the one that has to do with occultism and esotericism, and I truly recommend Mark Williams' fantastic monograph, Ireland's Immortals, to dive into this topic. The second part of his book has a fantastic and very long chapter dedicated to what he called the Danann mysteries, and the relevance of esotericism, of the theosophic root, and how it plays into Irish nationalist and romantic culture, and especially in the first half of the 20th century. And in that way, you hear things like that Jean Markel and the Argentinian Mason bring into the mix again, right? Myths such as, Celtic Christianity is full of Druidism. It's full of Druidism. It has so much. It has so much of this pre-Christian religion, right? And they go, and you hear things like, yes, the Anhara was a Druidic institution that was imported into Celtic monasticism, or the fasting against God is another example of this pagan thing that was imported into religion. Even the tonsure, and that is a medieval Irish legend. Say the idea that the infamous and mysterious Irish tonsure, because for the life of me I cannot imagine how was this tonsure that went from one ear to the other one. Like, did they shave in the shape of my earphones, or was it that they had shaven the forehead? And I don't know. But the Irish thought during the Middle Ages there was this idea invented that the Irish had taken that tonsure from Simon Magus, right? And these esoteric writers and disseminators have taken it face value, and they say they got it from the Druids, things like that. So in one way we try to avoid the label Celtic Christianity to avoid all of that. But deep down, the question of Celtic Christianity boils down to two things, right? One is there a Celtic Christianity in the sense that is something that is somehow common to the Celtic realms, to therefore Brittany and France, Ireland, Wales, Cornwall, the Isle of Man, and Scotland? Is there something common enough to speak about Celtic Christianity rather than Irish or Hibernian Christianity or Cimbric Christianity or whatever? That is one question. And the other question is there anything that is distinctive enough, that is special enough to allow us to make it distinct from other early medieval, from the rest of the early medieval West? And the answer seems to be, for the first part, dubious, because the availability of sources is scanty for most of these places. Say sources from Scotland, sources from the Isle of Man, sources from Cornwall, sources from Brittany. There's a gap. Ireland starts long before, so there I guess we would say something like I don't know, even if of course there are connections that can be verified. And to the other question, the tendency has been to say no as well. For instance, if you pick up a handbook on the history of liturgy from the first half of the 20th century, you will find the Celtic Rite. And now we know that the Celtic Rite doesn't exist. The Celtic Rite is a variation, and a very trivial one at that, of the Gaulish Rite, of the Gallican Rite. So then the research done by Hillgrath has illuminated, and then so much research done after that, after his pioneering work on the contact between the Visigothic Spain and Ireland, and how much of the uniquely Irish things are actually Visigothic in origin, because there was some kind of open highway of knowledge between Spain and Ireland, especially in the 7th century, right? So what is weird? What is so special that will make Irish Christianity distinct from everything else, and make it useful beyond the romantic or the political to speak about Celtic Christianity? But oddly enough, my answer is that there are weird things. If you drop the question, of saying, or if you drop the misplaced hypothesis, because for a long time, right, scholars in our field, they were trying to prove an idea that they had beforehand. And I think that something that is better now is that we come to do research, trying to have an open mind, and we get to the answers we get. We simply do. And there's a lot of weird. There's a lot of unusual. I am completely uninterested about the big question of saying, can we talk about Celtic Christianity or not, or Celtic monasticism or not? I'm completely uninterested in that particular thing there. And after having dropped the question, because I had it, as I think everyone had it at some point, yes, there Eric says, or to speak about Celtic at all. I mean, Celtic at this point is just has to do with language, period. It's a linguistic thing. But after dropping the question, I have found weird things that are interesting and fascinating to me on their own right, completely separated from the whole Celtic Christianity question, which still fascinates some scholars. We were talking about Michael Herron's reboot of the issue in his book. What's the name? Christ in Celtic Christianity, 2010, I think it is, in which he reboots the whole question of the common Celtic Church and Celtic Christianity and stuff, putting a lot of stock on the Pelagian issue. And I wholeheartedly disagree with his arguments and findings, both. And about the Keile J, it's a very interesting thing, because what I decided to do there is that I decided to take like a snapshot, like a snapshot of the Irish Middle Ages, and research that as much with as much depth as I could, and precisely not trying to answer big questions in the beginning. Just see what's there, just precisely and exactly see what's there. And I decided to work with the so-called Keile J. And at this point, I don't speak about Keile J anymore. I say that I work with the Tala Teriglas corpus, and I work with the Moilruan Moildithrib circle of scholars. If I can say something more about this, just very vaguely, at this point of the research, I am convinced that
don't worry about the time too much. We can go on for another while. It's been a great conversation.
Thank you. At this point, I'm convinced that people who were saying yes, there's nothing special about Keile J. There's nothing special about the term. I think they were mostly right, but in a weird way. So for those of you who do not have Old Irish, Keile J literally means the Keile of God, and the word Keile, I'm not translating it presently because it's a very loaded word. Originally, it has to do with ele, that means other, the other. And actually, in modern Irish, when you say lechele, it means together. So Tachi and lechele is Tati together. So it has that sense of the other in a pair, the other in a pair, and that's why in modern Irish the word Keile you see it most often in the phrases Fer Keile, which means husband, and Van Keile, that means wife, and this sense of companion, of mate, is all over the place in the Middle Ages. But also Keile has a very legal concept, a very legal meaning attached to it, which is usually translated as client. And this is the meaning for Keile that you usually see in law texts, in the law tracts of early Ireland. So we're left there with these people who were called the Keile of God, with the option of reading these mainly as the mates of God, the companions of God, the spouses of God even, or the clients of God, and possibly the slaves of God. This is what William Reeves believed at the end of the 19th century, when he said that Ceile Dei is nothing but an Irish translation of the phrase servus Dei, so the slave of God, which he believed designated monks and nuns all over the place. I disagree with that as well. I think that it's a different thing altogether. The word Ceile Dei appears for the first time, I think, in the Old Irish notes to the Book of Armagh, and it actually glosses Servus Dei. So it was employed originally as translation of that. And it is used elsewhere in the same sense, without any sort of explanation, of any kind. Say, for example, Saint Molin of Tach Molin, a very important saint of the Leinster tradition. He's called a Ceile Dei very often. And there is the story in which the devil appears to Saint Molin, and he appears, and this is probably an appropriation from a similar story from the Vita Martini of Martin of Tours by Sulpicius Severus. Oh, there she is. So you know, it is the story that the devil appears as a prince or a king in a kingly garment, and Molin says, "That's not you. That's not Christ," because when he appears to the Ceile Dei, he appears as the poor and the leper. So more or less that idea. So my opinion is that the word Ceile Dei appears all over the place, meaning a true Christian, a true law-abiding Christian. So it's not for monks, but for good monks, for saintly people, for saints in life. People, nowadays Roman Catholics would say people who smell of sanctity, people who smell of holiness. So it's I think it's a more moderate, more cautious way of saying that someone is a saint while they are still alive. But possibly a myriad of other meanings come into these, and very strongly with the connotation of a true Christian. Say, for example, in my texts, in the Tala Teriglas corpus, the word Ceile Dei does not appear that often. It appears way less often than people would want it, would make it. People assume that the word Ceile Dei is all over the corpus, and it's really not. It's really not. It's used practically as often as the word as the phrase Macbethad, which means a son of life, which is also again a true Christian, a true law-abiding Christian. Because we have to keep in mind that at this time here, Elaine might agree with me or not, but we have the situation of a Christianity that was installed relatively fast in Ireland, but a very long process of true Christianization, a very long process in which the culture was accommodating to the new religion. So for a long time, you would have, on the one hand, a true Christian population, people who live in Cravwith, that is in piety, law-abiding Christians who do not shed blood and behave with a regulated sort of sexuality, mostly, and then the rest of the false Christians, who are mostly treated as they were pagan, false Christians that are probably baptized and Christians, but only in name. And I think that Macbeth points to the true Christian, to the true, real kind of Christian. And there's another flexion of this Ceile Dei idea that I find very interesting, that was suggested in a talk by Liam Branagh. He didn't see it, but he was pointing towards that. So one of the most interesting texts for the study of the idea of Ceile Dei is the poems of Blatvac Mac Con Breton, which were written around the year, I think it's around 750, by a man who has nothing to do whatsoever that we know of with the circle of Saint Moldruan of Tala and Saint Meldithrev. He's a man of the north. He's an Ulsterman, related to the Fir Rish, if I'm not wrong. And he uses the word Kele all over the place in with a religious connotation. So does Einros of Tala, the author of the Failure Einros. And these made Brian Lampkin connect the two texts very strongly in his hypothesis about what a Kele De means in Celtica, whatever. I don't remember the number and of the issue. I mean. But Liam Branagh, when discussing the usage of Kele and the vocabulary that pertains to the legal institution of Keelshine in early Ireland, he highlighted several stanzas from Blathbach's poems in which the Kele of God par excellence are the Jewish people in the Old Testament. So they are the bad Kele that betrayed God's covenant, a failed Kelshine, a failed sort of clientship. And in that way, I believe, and I will argue for this in my upcoming dissertation, I am arguing for this. I think that it has a lot to do with the pronounced scripturalism of early Irish monasticism and Christianity in general, which is something that has been highlighted ad nauseam in the past. But I have some new insights on that. I think that one of the flexions that mattered the most of the concept of Kele De at the turn of the 9th century was the idea of the covenant. So a Kele De is one bound by God's new covenant. So that is weird. That is weird. I mean, Ireland has a level of fondness for the Old Testament that is curious in the context of early medieval Europe. But I will leave it there. Read my dissertation when it's available.
Okay, so we are approaching the end of the interview. Thank you so much, Exequiel. But we have one more question. Can you talk a little for us about how we may articulate gender and queer studies with religious studies at this point?
Yes, of course. So I will talk out of experience, as I told you. When I first came to Ireland, I was so deep in the closet that I was in Narnia. I have to tell, impossibly closeted, but still queer. So I was fascinated when I started reading the text. I was fascinated of how gay these people were, and they were gay like me because they were gay in a very closeted way, in a very dude, I'm not gay, no homo way, right? So I started getting myself fascinated by the idea of by the notion of friendship, and I did my master's thesis exactly on that. My master's thesis is called "May I Be Yours, May You Be Mine: Monastic Friendship and Intimacy in Early Medieval Ireland," which was an adventure and a very beautiful one that actually ended up freeing me from some prejudices that I have about myself. I am actually very invested in my field biographically as well, I have to say. Celtic studies saved my life, among other things. Among other things, because I wanted to eschew the sexuality question and just focus on like no homo friendship. And my supervisor Morin said, you simply cannot. You cannot be talking about like same-sex spaces and same-sex relations and not consider this side of the whole issue. But anyway, so one thing is to deconstruct, right? It's a word that gets thrown around all the time, but in the way that Foucault was so good at doing, even if the word, I think it's more Derrida than Foucault, but anyway, to treat ideas with a genealogical interest, to say, where do things that we feel and believe come from, and to go into a field such as ours, trying to see the ancestors of our ideas. And what we will find when we go as far in the past as the early Middle Ages in Ireland is that things were thought of very differently, and that things that we are used to believe and feel they're natural, they're not. And I think that traveling, be that traveling in time through research or traveling geographically, affords you that experience, right? Say, for example, how weird was it for me when I read for the first time in the Tala, in the monastery of Tala, that women are 3 times more inclined towards lust than men, in a context in which we are told all the time that told or hinted at, right, rather than explicitly told, that men are naturally naturally sexual, and they and we have like so much trouble in controlling our impulses, for example. Or you open another text in the notes of the Failure Endless, and you see 2 very, very holy saints taking a bath together, like bathing in the same bathtub. And one of the 2 goes, "Hey, your body is great," because he does. That is what he says. Nice bod. And the other one goes like, "Yeah, but it's gonna go away eventually because I'm going to get old and die." And this one does this fantastically gay miracle and makes his body incorruptible in life, so that beautiful body will not go amiss. So that the world will not lose that beautiful body, and that saintly friend of his will die hot. It's a very weird thing. And you see kisses, and you see hugs, and you see people holding hands. And for example, for me, that was a very strong hint at saying, okay, they don't like sex, they don't like intercourse, but they approve of all the rest of gayness. Like everything that is gay, that is not actually having intercourse, is perfectly okay for these people. It's perfectly okay for these people. So I think that, I mean, what you will find when you go into these fields, or these kind of fields that are so distant from us, with questions that are your own, gender for sure, for women and gender non-conforming people of all sorts. I am cisgender, so I am possibly not as naturally sensitive towards gender issues as I am about romantic and sexual orientation issues. You will find all these kind of oddities, and we can start deconstructing proper. It's not such a deeply articulated answer that the one that I'm giving now, because while my master's thesis was on that, my PhD is in a broader issue that has a lot to do with that, by the way. That has a lot to do with that, which is sin. My PhD is the theology of sin and penance in the Tala Teriglas corpus, and that has a lot to do with the body and shame and fear around the body and gender and love and things like that. But I haven't thought of these things like directly or articulately, in a while. So I'm sorry, but there's a lot to be done. There's absolutely a lot to be done. But I will say one more thing. Sorry, I will say one more thing. A very useful thing as a starting point is approaching the material from our experience rather than from our categories, right? Because saying, for example, and this is yet another LGBTQ example rather than for something from women's studies. When you come to the problem with saying, okay, but are they gay? Dude, before the 19th century, no one was gay because the word didn't exist, right? But when you come from experience, from feeling, from vivencia, we say in Spanish. I do not know. There has to be a word in Portuguese. Vivenza, something like that.
Vivência, sim.
Vivencia.
It's exactly
Okay,
the same, vivencia, yes.
Okay, from vivencia, you will see stuff. You will see stuff. You will see kisses, hugs, tears. You will see that in the 11th century poem Robert Melech, in which Columcille, a fictional Columcille, laments his exile in Scotland. One of the things he says is Robert the Melech, that is how sweet it would be, or it would be sweet to sleep with Covgal and to see Canech again. You will see that kind of stuff. And if you come with the question, is this dude gay? It stops the train thought, say. It does. It does stop the train thought. Instead, when you come from more concrete things, from things that you do, from things that you feel, that you think, it's way more fertile. Sorry. Wow.
I guess I'll let someone lead and ask if we have questions from the audience. If things hit come down, I'll try to close. If not, I'll let Tati do that.
I can do that. No, Elisa has priority always. So I would like to know if there's anything that anyone else would want to ask, but I think we've pretty much gone through everything. Everyone during our conversations.
Have we missed any questions?
Of the questions, no, we have sort of gathered them and went with what was going on with the chat. And all in all, it was brilliant.
What I mean is, so I'm seeing the comments here. Maybe we skipped somebody's question. That was what I was asking.
No. I think we had a question. The question about Eric sent us a question, which was the one that Elaine talked about, and then we were just sort of commenting on it. Mateus was mentioning about misconceptions about Celtics and Celtic stuff, which is very common here as well. But all in all, it was just absolutely brilliant, and it was grand talking to you and listening to all of that.
Thank you.
It's sort of
amazing.
Yes, it gives me a lot of ideas as well, because it makes me go back to things I've read, things I've written and felt and thought about. So it was actually pretty incredible. I don't even know how to thank you. Thank you so much. This was very enjoyable, and I think it was just all in all incredible. So thank you for coming. Thank you for talking to us, and for
sorry, I lost you. Thank you.
There you go. And it was really inspiring. I suppose. Are we there?
I hear you.
I think we lost him. Are we losing him?
Hello.
Exequiel? Yes, we got you. We're back.
Oh Lord. Wait. I'm here. I promise.
Okay.
No, you're back.
But it's not.
So,
but it's not working too well. Okay.
No, anyway, we just really wanted to thank you. I think it was really inspiring who were starting on the field or are like, you know, in the first stages of their research. So thank you so much, so very much. And you can expect that we will call you back for another interview. Make sure of that. We'll make sure to have you back.
Wonderful conversation. Thank you so much. It was really, really inspiring, as Mateus is saying as well. I think it was to all of us. So thank you so much.
Please keep me in the loop for all the beautiful things you're doing, and thank you so much. I was really thrilled and touched that you that you reached out to me this time. Thank you.
It was great. So thank you. Eu quero aproveitar e agradecer.
We say our goodbyes.
We say our goodbyes. I'm just going to say thank you, and muito obrigada para todo mundo que esteve aqui, que acompanhou com a gente, pelas perguntas. And Exequiel, I'll just ask you to say your goodbyes and we can close it off.
I said my piece already. Thank you so much. This was an absolutely wonderful experience, and I'm thrilled that there are more brethren, sibling scholars of Celtic and insular stuff in Latin America, and I truly look forward to working with you. And voy a decir esto en español, lo más neutro, porque para que no se espanten del acento chileno, cooperemos en el futuro, porque este trabajo tiene que volver a ser colectivo. Un abrazo. Hasta siempre. Slong of foil. Hasta siempre.
Tchau, pessoal. Obrigada.
Até mais,
bye.
Gente. Obrigada. Tchau, tchau.